forget to come up here and grab this microphone, and I didn't feel like walking up today to get it, so give me just a second to suit up here. I feel like we should have a background music of the sea, the lapping, the waves splashing up in the waves. It's technology, you gotta love it, right? We are going to be continuing on in our study of miracles. But before we get into today's miracles, I want to thank everyone who helped in any way for the Ladies' Day, whether it was preparation beforehand, the ladies making the pot holders to give out as gifts yesterday, those who came yesterday to help. The mess showed up and they helped the whole day in getting things set up. Terry and John and Caleb helped in preparing the food and getting it passed out, and stayed yesterday to help us clean up and to get the auditorium back for this morning. So we had a lot of help in doing that. It was, in my opinion, a very successful event. We had, I don't know what the total count was. I counted like 55, but I don't know about this kitchen staff and everything. But we had a good amount of people here from as way as Kashmir and Bonners Ferry. So we had a good turnout of ladies, and so it was good. I want to talk a little bit about the navigation this morning, and especially marine navigation. Everybody is familiar with the beauty of lighthouses and their function. Lighthouses have two basic functions. Those are to help in navigation and to alert the sailors of danger. They flash navigation and danger. Navigation and danger. All night, every night, 365 days a year. Navigation and danger. That's the two purposes of a lighthouse. If the sailor has traveled correctly, he's read his maps correctly, and he comes into a dark port, that light is his navigation. That is, if he's come into the right port. Otherwise, it could be danger, because a lighthouse does that. If you're coming into the correct port, and I'm going to use Pensacola because that's where I grew up and I'm familiar with the lighthouses. If you're coming into Pensacola Bay and you are coming into Pensacola Bay and you see that lighthouse, you can look at your map and know where you are and where the dangers are. But if you were coming into Pensacola Bay and you came into Fort Walton and you see the lighthouse and you think you're in Pensacola, you have problems. Because when you look at your map and you say, oh, I've got a sandbar here, I've got a jetty here, I've got a beach here, if you're coming into the wrong port and you're looking at the wrong map, then your dangers that your map is showing you are totally off. Because you're looking at the wrong lighthouse and you're looking at the wrong location on your map. So yes, it's flashing navigation danger, but you might be looking for the wrong dangers. So it's important to know where you are at. And that's what the sailor is responsible to do, to keep up his map and know exactly where they are. And now I do not understand nighttime navigation with the sextant and how to read the stars and to know where you're at. I've never gotten into that and I don't need to. But I do know how to do land navigation, and I've done a lot of that with the outdoors that I get into. And how to find your location. And that's the biggest thing with navigation. The first key is to know where you are at. Then everything else can fall into place. But if you're wrong into where you think you are at, navigation is wrong. You're not going to go in the wrong direction. For us as Christians, our navigation is our Bible. and we need to know the Bible. We need to know where we are at in our Christian life so that we can navigate properly. Now, there are a lot of different translations out there, and we've had some discussions on that. Most of the translations are good. Some have a little bit different wording and all, but some of them have totally different wording, and you can get a totally different meaning when you read that book. And I've shared with this years ago, and I've got it in a magazine pack somewhere. They were showing a new Bible that was supposed to be coming out. I don't know if it ever did. And all the scriptures were highlighted with different colors. And when you looked at the highlighting descriptions, if it was green, then more than likely Jesus said those words. If it was highlighted in yellow, Jesus more than likely said those words. Orange, and I'm just trying to guess the colors. Orange, Jesus may or may not have said those words. And the red, Jesus didn't say those. And so when you read this Bible and you looked at those colors and you see God making a commandment to us and what we need to be doing as a Christian, and it's highlighted in red, well, Jesus didn't say this. This is something that was just added to the Bible. Then you're going to look at that and say, you know what? I don't have to do whatever it is this is telling me to do as a Christian, because this Bible is telling me God didn't say that. When we as Christians know that every word in here is inspired by God and is the truth. And when we start second guessing this, it's like taking a map and saying, you know what? I don't really like that mountain being here. I'm going to change that and erase that and put in a beautiful valley or something. You know, that's what they have done when they start second guessing the Bible. They are destroying the navigation that we are required to read as a Christian and are required to follow. Disclosure statement. I am not a seaman. I am an airman. Okay, I was in the Air Force, not the Navy. I know how to read maps, not necessarily nautical maps. I do know enough about them that I can describe some things. And if they had a symbol, description, I could tell you what things are. But I lived on the coast, so I know enough to not get lost, maybe. But I wanted to show you this. I looked and looked and looked, and this is the only nautical map that I could find that was big enough to read and showed lighthouses or light objects that I could use in here. Southern Head, in case you don't know where that's at, I didn't. I had to look it up. If you go all the way up to Maine, to the farthest eastern portion of Maine, and you looked out across the Atlantic Ocean towards Nova Scotia, which is off to the east of this, you probably wouldn't be able to see it because of this island is right off the coast. It's closer to Maine than it is Nova Scotia. Okay? So if we go to the southern end of Southern Head, and you can see these symbols on the left and right. Those are symbols for a light device in the water. It could be a lighthouse. It could be a buoy. It could be a sign on an island. Anything that's got a light would be a symbol for it. So if we look down here to the southwest corner, we see in yellow, if you can see it, it says head light, yada, 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 a horn. So that is some type of a lighthouse. It could just be a tower with a light on top of it, but it also has a horn. So I'm going to guess that's a foghorn. And when we look at this map, and you can see the dark green kind of wavy all the way around it, those are either rocks or reefs. Being up in that cold water, I would guess it's more rocks than it is reefs. You find those in the southern hemisphere. Okay? And so we have this light that is warning you of the land, that there's an island here, and it is also warning you that there are rocks. If you look at your map like this here, you're going to say, okay, there's Gulf Cliff, and that's going to be my west headlight. And so when I look at my navigational map like this one is, you're going to see these warnings, these dangers that you're going to find. And then off to the right, you see Black Rock. It's another, again, a light and looking at here, I determined, it says up here, Bell, that this is going to be a buoy out in the water, that when the waves hit it and all, it ding, ding, to let you know that that's there. And so again, when you pull up, you can see the green kind of curly rock there in the middle. That's what that is. It's called black rock. Again, that is a navigational danger area that you want to avoid. But now imagine that you come in from this side and you see this black rock light, but you think you're over here coming in and you think it's that. How does that affect your navigation? It does. Because when you think you're coming in here, but you're actually coming in here, to Black Rock, you can run aground because you're looking at the wrong light and interpreting it wrong where you are at. So again, navigation, knowing where you are at properly is important, not only in navigation, in boat, in walking around, but in our Christian life. We need to know where we are at. I want to introduce you to the next generation of navigation up from the lighthouse. This is called a LORAN, L-O-R-A-N. It stands for Long Range Navigation. This is what my Uncle Clyde had in his deep sea fishing boat that I've shared stories with you. I was going to tell you more today, but I decided not to. But this is what he had in his boat. And there are LORAN stations scattered, or used to be, I don't know if they still are, all along the Gulf Coast. And each one of these LORAN stations transmit a particular signal 1,500 miles. And this device will pick up all of these LORAN signals and crunch them and tell you and find out where you are at, and it will display up in this window your latitude and longitude. Then you pull out your map and you find out the latitude and longitude. Okay, here's where I'm at. And then from there, you can set a course, to go up to Pensacola Bay and say, I need to go to, 270 degrees. So you pull up your compass and go 270, and that's where you would drive, steer to find Pensacola Bay, hopefully. The problem we had when I was out with Uncle Clyde and my dad deep sea fishing, I'm going to guess we were 5 or 10 miles out into the Gulf, was we woke up the next morning to a huge storm. And the swells, I kid you not, were 20 to 30 feet high. We would go down in the bottom of the swell, and we were looking up here at the top waves, top of the waves. And what was scary is when I looked in there, I don't know if you noticed out here, we have these huge logs where Avista cut down the trees. We were seeing logs like that floating in these wave banks. Because you imagine what would happen had one of those hit our wooden boat, 10 miles out into the Gulf. But we would go up, we're down here, and the waves up here, well, then we'd ride that swell up, and we're sitting up here 30 feet in the air, looking down at the wave bottom. Well, all the waves are not smooth and perpendicular to each other. And so you ride up and you'd come down, and you might be going north, you go up, you come down, you could be facing east. And you go up and you come down, you could be facing west or whatever. And so it was a constant battle for Clyde to keep the boat, that compass headed to 270 degrees so we could end up in Pensacola. But he was able to do it, and after hours of fighting it, it calmed down a little bit, getting into shallower water, and sure enough, there was the bay to Pensacola, and so it was great. Now, in reading about the LORAN, I found one problem. The accuracy of a LORAN is plus or minus 10 tens of miles. Not accuracy of plus or minus 10 miles, but tens miles. So even though it's saying you are here, you could actually be over here 20 miles away because the LORAN was not that accurate. So instead of coming into Pensacola Bay, you could end up 20 miles down the beach either way. Put it to you this way. You're going on a excursion, and say you're taking a charter and on a bus, and you're going to see Mount Rushmore. And when you get on the bus, they hand you binoculars. And they go to South Dakota, and they drive out, and they say, okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you look out your window, you'll see the mountain 20 miles away. And if you use the binoculars that we gave you, you can just barely make out the faces of the presidents on Mount Rushmore. That's 20 miles away. Would you take that tour? Probably not. Because if you spend all that money and you've taken that long of a trip, you want to get out there at the Mount Rushmore site and look up at the mountains, not be 20 miles away. That was the accuracy of this Loran, plus or minus tens of miles. Now we get to what is currently the navigational system used, and that's GPS. We all have GPS probably on our phone, and we use it to get from here to there. Boats have navigation with GPS. And the navigation, from what I read, I've never been on a boat that had GPS or used it, but from what I read this week, it is kind of like what your GPS is on your phone. When you pull it up, it says you are here. Okay? Which is good to know because you need to know where you are at. And that's what the GPS does. It says your boat is here. Okay? And it usually has a little star or something to say so. Or maybe a little picture of a boat like ours have a little car on it. Now with your phone, you want to go across town, you want to go across the country, you type in that address, thinking, and boom, it shows you your map. Turn by turn, how to go from here to there. Whether it is going to Liberty Lake or if it's going to Washington, D.C. It's going to give you turn by turn on what it is to get there. Now, on other GPSs, the ones I use out in the woods, and I think, if I'm reading it right, the way the boat is, if you say, I want to go to wherever it is, I don't see any things on there, but if you wanted to go to a certain place, like say the beach, that you wanted to go there, it's going to draw a straight line from where you are now to where it is that you want to go. It's not going to tell you all the dangers. It's not going to route you around the shallow waters. It's not going to route you around the rocks, It's just going to say, oh, here you are, there's where you want to go. It's up to you to take that information and go around, and you can see the lights that are scattered around, warning of dangers. You see the depth of the water. You see over here some green circles. Those are rocks. So there's a bunch of dangers being displayed here, but it's up to you to navigate around those dangers to get to where it is that you want to go. Now we know with our GPSs, and I'm sure we all have some kind of a horror story using our GPS to go from point A to point B. You're driving, and you know what? I want to go over here and get something to drink, and it says recalculating. Kathy hates that word because it's always a female voice that's telling her where to go, and she doesn't like that. And it's recalculating. And so I'll turn again, recalculating. And then she starts getting mad, We were coming out of Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge in Tennessee. And whenever we travel, I like to go one way and come back another way. I've already seen this route. I want to see what's on this route. Well, we have been to Gatlinburg several times, and it takes you down past it, and then you turn off and go circle back around. Well, I looked at my map, and I saw that I could come out of town and go right instead of straight, and come down along the edge of the Great Smoky Mountains, see the countryside, see a different route, and pop back out earlier onto the interstate. So I had typed in, in what we called Nuvie. That was the name of the device I saw called a Nuvie. But I turned right. And recalculating, and there's a big purple line, saying you need to turn here. A lot of times it's just turn around and go back the way. I'd pass that road, recalculating, and it would tell me again, another route. And I'd keep going because that's not where I wanted. I'd drive a little bit farther, recalculating, and it would draw another purple line trying to get me to go back, to go around. And I just ignored her. And I kept going, and I realized, you know what? Nuvie hadn't said anything lately. She hasn't told me to recalculate again. And so I looked over at my GPS, and I kid you not, all the roads that was being shown were purple. Nuvie had just gotten to the point and said, you know what? You're not going to follow me. You're not going to do what I tell you to do. I'm just going to turn everything purple. You pick a road. I'm shutting up. you know. And I looked at Kathy, just laughed. It was just like, it's funny, I've just never seen Nuvi do that before. But again, we need to know where we're at and where we're going and what it is that we are using as a navigational aid to get there. We can trust this, brothers and sisters. This is a very good navigational aid for us. We've already put in the destination. That's heaven. And this is going to tell us how to get there. But again, we need to be careful because even though this is pointing straight to where we need to go, there's still hazards and dangers that we as Christians need to navigate, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Galatians 5, verses 16 to 21, Paul tells us that there are two paths that we can take. In verse 16, I say then, walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. So here's our two paths. We can either walk by the Spirit, or we can walk according to the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusts against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. So the Spirit and the flesh are constantly at war at each other. We should know this. We deal with this probably on a daily basis, of the Spirit within us dealing with the fleshly side of us. And these are contrary to one another, so that you do the things that you wish not to do. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. We either walk the narrow path and walk in the Spirit, or we walk the wide path to destruction by following after our fleshly lust. We can't take both paths because they war against each other. They are contrary to one another. They are like water and oil. When you walk with worldly, fleshly lust, we do the things that we are not supposed to do. Continuing on in verse 19. Now the works of the flesh are evident, just in case you didn't know what they are, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambitions, dissensions, heresies, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like. Very important words, and the like. It's not just these items that are listed, but anything that are like these. Of which I tell you beforehand, just as I also told you in time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. Who practice these things. Not that you've slipped up and you have said a bad word. But practicing is just like a doctor who practices medicine. He's doing it every day of his life. And if you have turned your back on the Spirit and you are doing these things and the like constantly and all the time, then you have turned your back on God and you are practicing these things. I want to start off this morning in reading in John 8, verse 12. Again, Jesus spoke to them saying, I am the light of the world. Whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. Jesus is the light of the world. Jesus is the light of your world. Each and every one of us, if you follow Jesus and not walk in the darkness, you will have the light of life. Problem is, we don't always follow Jesus, do we? Unfortunately, we don't. We have this tendency to sway this way or that in our journey to heaven. And that is what our miracle this morning is about. Now, I want to talk about a God thing. Two God things this past week. One was when I built this wall, I went by Home Depot or Lowe's and I bought 2 big bundles of 1x2 lumber. There was a stack of 10 each, so I bought 20. Just guessing. This is all by guesswork. It's nothing, no map, no directions or diagram or anything. I knew in my head what I wanted, the shape I wanted, and then I buy 1x2 lumber and I build just when we tear this apart, it's just a very limited framework to hold it in place. There's a framework on the bottom, in the middle to hold it from rocking, and then there's boards that go up with a frame, and then there's one board that sticks out right there, okay? And another board over here that sticks out, that I take the chicken wire and I form it and I squeeze it. My hands killed me the next day with the arthritis, and I just twist it and turn it and pull it and push it down, and I'll tack a staple here. So I didn't have any way of knowing how much wood I would need. I just bought 2 bundles thinking that's enough. When I got finished building this, I had 4 or 5 pieces that were about that long. That was it. So I had buying those 2 bundles of lumber was perfect for what I needed. The next thing was, I knew when I was asked to talk to this morning on the theme for the weekend, the lighthouse, as you see, there was one thing that popped in my mind, and that was the miracle of Jesus walking on the water. That was the miracle that I wanted to use today. I didn't know where it was falling in our category, our chronicle list of 37 miracles. And so I figured, well, I'll just take that miracle, bring it up today, and we'll just push everything else back down. Imagine my amazement when I pulled it up, and it was number 20. We did number 19 last week. So I don't have to move the miracles around. We're right in line with what the list that we're going by. And so that's what we're going to look at this morning as Jesus walks on the water in our list of miracles. Go ahead and write these down, because like last week, we're not going to read them all because of the length of them. We'll be in Matthew 14, verses 22 to 33, Mark 6, 45 to 52, and John 6, 16 to 21. We are going to be reading out of Matthew 14 this morning. Mark and John has pretty much the same story. They leave out a major part of it, which we will talk about. But then the parts of Mark and John that they bring out that are different, that's important, I'm going to bring those over. When I went to college, right out of high school, I went to Alabama Christian College in Montgomery, Alabama. And they've now changed it. When they went 4 years, they changed the name to Faulkner University. But one of the Bible courses that we were required to take was the fourfold Gospels. And it's in a book, probably about the size of this Bible. And it's the fourfold Gospels. And what they do is they take Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in chronological order, and they mesh their stories together. It makes it kind of a hard read because of the way it's written, as you'll see this morning. But it brings the 4 Gospels together. And that's what I want to do this morning, is bring these 3 scriptures together and just mesh in, and you'll see how I do it, Mark and John's comment, that are different than Matthew's. So if you remember the lessons that we've looked at so far in our journey through the miracles, Jesus started out in Capernaum, walked down to Nain, where he healed the widow's son outside the city gates. Then they walked back up that same day, probably around Tiberias, got in their boat to go across that evening, and that's when they had the big storm, and Jesus quieted the storm with the 3 words, "Peace be still." They rowed across during the night over to the eastern shore, where they were met by the 2 men that were demon-possessed with the legion of demons. Jesus cast them out. The city kind of politely asked them to leave. So they got back in their boats that same day, paddled back across towards Capernaum. They got out. The lady touched him who had the issue of blood and was healed. And he raised Jairus' daughter from the dead. Then he went back up to Capernaum, did a couple, 3 more miracles. And now they got back in their boats last week and rowed across, I always want to say sailed, back over towards the top end of the Sea of Galilee. He got out. The horde of people were there, 5,000 men plus the women and children. And he fed them with the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. And that's where this story picks up here in Matthew 14, verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side. And then in parentheses here, John tells us that they started across the sea back to Capernaum, where they had started that same day. While Jesus, dismissed the crowds that had gathered there that he had just fed. Verse 23, and after he had dismissed the crowds, He went up on the mountain. Jesus went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. So this is the same day. He's just fed the thousands. He's put the disciples in a boat, tell them go back to Capernaum. And then he dismisses the crowd and goes up into the mountain to be by himself to pray. Verse 24, but the boat by this time was a long way from land. John tells us when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles. Beaten by the waves, Mark tells us that he saw that they were making headway painfully, for the wind was against them. So it has been, as we're going to see here in a minute, it's been 6 to maybe 12 hours that these disciples are out there rowing in their boat trying to get back to Capernaum. They've only gone 3 to 4 miles because they have a strong headwind. That's, it's one of those you row 3 strokes and you get pushed back 2 type of thing. Okay? 25, and in the 4th watch of the night, which the 4th watch is the Roman guard time between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. Okay? So they get in the boats at evening, and I'm just going to say 6 o'clock, and here it is 3 to 6 o'clock the next morning. So it's been, 6 hours or more that they have been out there rowing. So after the 4th watch, Mark tells us that Jesus, when he went out on the water, he was going to pass them by. But Mark tells us that he came to them walking on the sea. I'm going to propose to you that we actually have 4 miracles in this story. The one we ever think about and the one that we talk about in a way that's headlined probably in your Bible is just Jesus walks on the water. And so this is what he's doing here. He's walking on the Sea of Galilee to the disciples. They're in their rowing boat, just rowing and rowing and rowing and not getting very far. Verse 26. Now, Mark and John, for whatever reason, leaves out this very important part of Jesus or Peter walking on the water. Some people say that they didn't want to put Peter in their stories because they didn't want to, if I can use the term, badmouth Peter, make Peter, bring Peter about in a wrong light because of him failing. But for whatever reason, Mark and John do not include Peter walking on the water, and that's the reason we're working through Matthew. But when the disciples saw Jesus walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. Now, why do you think that the disciples thought that Jesus was a ghost? There's a lot of description as to why. Some, the one I believe in, is that he glowed. Okay? That he had a white aurora about him. It could be because it's morning. They're not expecting somebody to be walking out on the water to them. And so in the morning sunlight, the mist that's being caused by the waves being hit by the wind, that maybe they see it, just again, somebody's walking out to you. You're going to think it's a ghost. You're not going to think it's somebody. But for whatever reason, they think it's a ghost. And they cried out in fear. Verse 27, but immediately Jesus spoke to them saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out on the water." Jesus immediately calms them down by telling them to take heart. It is I. Don't be afraid. Then the part that Mark and John leave out is Peter immediately tells Jesus, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out on the water with you." Now, Peter and the rest of the apostles have been given the power. We read about that. When they were sent out, they were given the power to heal and to raise the dead. Do you think they also had the power to walk on water? If Peter had not asked Jesus, if he had just stepped out of his boat on his own accord, do you think he would have been able to walk on the water? Or did he have to have that invitation from Jesus? I don't know. The scriptures don't tell us. But command me to come out on the water with you. Notice that nobody else asked that question. Nobody else in the boat asked that same question. Maybe it's because they didn't believe it. Maybe it was, okay, you know what, guys? We'll just sit back and we'll let Peter do this. We'll let Peter go out. We'll see what happens to Peter. But Peter has what it takes. He has the faith to step out of that boat. And I don't think he sat on the edge of the boat and put his foot out and tested the water first. I think Peter, at this point, he stepped out of that boat. He had the faith to do that. What does it take for you to get out of your boat? To get out of your safety place? For them, it was in that boat. Yes, the waves are crashing around us, the wind's blowing us backwards, but we're somewhat safe in this boat. Stepping out into this storm, remember it's still storming at this point. Stepping out into this storm is not a safe thing to do. But Peter says, you know what? I'm doing it. I want to join, Lord, out here. I want to be able to walk on the water. And he does. Jesus said one simple word, come. You know, Jesus doesn't mix a lot of big feathery words. When there was a storm, peace, be still. Arise, take up your bed and walk. And to Peter, come. Come and join me out here on the Sea of Galilee. So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came up to Jesus. I'm doing it. I don't know if he looked back at the boat, but probably not, but he's looking at Jesus. Because he's excited. He's doing it. He's walking on the water. Verse 30. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, and he cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Peter gets out of the boat and walks to Jesus. But then the wind hits him. And he takes his eyes off of Jesus and looks at the storm. Maybe the water was lapping up on his legs. And he looks down and you know what's happening. But he took his eyes off of his lighthouse. He took his eyes off of Jesus. And what happened? He sank. That's what happens to us, brothers and sisters, when we take our eyes off of Jesus. This is what happens when we lose our focus on Jesus and we get distracted by what's happening around us. And there's a lot today that's happening around us in this world. When we take our eyes off of Jesus, off of our lighthouse, we start falling back to what we read about in Galatians 5 and that long list of things, those fleshly desires. And we start sinking. We have got to stay focused on Jesus, our lighthouse. Going on in verse 32. And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. John tells us, and immediately the boat was at the land to which they were going. So there's a third miracle. Well, excuse me. The third miracle is the wind ceased. As soon as Jesus gets in the boat, it's calm. The winds have died down. The waters are calm. The fourth miracle that John records is when they get in the boat, wherever they were at, out here on the Sea of Capernaum, they're sitting outside the Sea of Galilee. Now they're sitting outside of Capernaum. Just like that. That's a fourth miracle. They didn't have to row to get to Capernaum. Jesus gets in the boat, the wind ceases, and they're across the lake. Verse 33, And those in the boat worshiped Jesus, saying, Truly, truly, you are the Son of God. I mean, think about the witness, think of the miracles that they have witnessed in the last, say, 2 or 3 days. The raising of the dead, calming the storm, casting out the legion of demons, the lady being healed by just touching his garment, raising the daughter of Jairus, feeding 5,000 plus with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. Truly, you are the Son of God. You just calmed the storm and boom, we're across the ocean. Peter walked out on the water. But what does Mark tell us? And they were utterly astounded, for they did not understand about the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. For some reason, they didn't understand what happened with the feeding of the thousands with just the 5 loaves and 2 fish. And because of that, Mark records that their heart was hardened. But not now. Not now after what just happened out here on the sea. Now they're saying, Truly, you are the Son of God. Truly, you are the Son of God. Where are you in your walk with Jesus? Is Jesus still your lighthouse? Do you still focus on Jesus? Do you follow the light of Jesus? In John 8, verse 12, then Jesus spoke to them again, saying, I am the light of the world. He who follows me shall not walk in darkness, but have the light of life. If we follow Jesus, we will not walk in darkness. But what happens is we sway. We come off course. We go to the darkness. And we need to be recalculating on how to get back on track, get back where we need to be to make sure that we're following Jesus so that we do not walk in darkness. I chose this picture. I liked it because the water beach scene or the rocky scene there, coastline, kind of resembles this one. I didn't use that one, but I like that picture. I want to share 4 scriptures and then we'll close for the morning. In John 9, verse 5, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. In Acts 26, verse 18, to open their eyes, he was talking about the Jews and the Gentiles, in order to open their eyes, in order to turn them from darkness back to light, from the power of Satan back to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among those who are sanctified by faith in me. Understand that's what the Spirit does when we come off course. Our Spirit is recalculating on how to get us away from the devil and back to God, how to get us off the wide path and back to the narrow path, trying to keep us in line with Jesus, our lighthouse. Philippians 2, verses 14 through 16. Do all things, everything we do, not just some things, but everything, do all without complaining or disputing. Ooh. Sometimes that's kind of hard to do, isn't it? Everything without complaining or disputing. Verse 15. That you may become blameless and harmless children of God, without fault in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation. Sound kind of like our society today? Perverse and crooked. Among whom, who? Among this perverse and crooked generation, who is to shine? You shine as lights in the world. You. Each and every one of us are supposed to shine no matter what's going on around us. Our Christian light must shine. And we sang that song yesterday. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. Verse 16, holding fast the word of life, so that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain or labored in vain. And then the last scripture, Matthew 5, verses 14, 15, and 16. You again are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all those who are in the house. You are not to be hiding your Christian light. You are supposed to be letting your Christian light shine all the time, no matter what, no matter where you're at, no matter who you're talking to. If you're at home, if you're here, if you're at work, your Christian light has got to shine. Verse 16, why? Let your light so shine before the men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven. When people look at you at work, do they see your Christian light? Do they ask you why you don't cuss? Why you carry a Bible? Why you say a prayer before you eat? That's letting your Christian light shine. And when they ask, then you know what? Then you can glorify your good works through God. Our light, our lighthouse, us, has got to shine regardless. Does your light shine? Are you following Jesus? Are you on the correct path? Do you know where you are at? Are you on the straight and narrow path to heaven? Or have you stumbled upon the wide path and that's where you're at? We need to listen to our spirit, our Holy Spirit that's inside of us, when it's trying to guide us down that narrow path. We need to make sure that our Christian light is shining and that people see that, and then we can glorify our Father which is in heaven. If not, let us help you. Let us pray for you. Let us talk about it.